The dust of the long road from Dimmitt County clung to Jesse Holt in a pale, gritty film, a second skin earned over 3 days of steady riding. It was the summer of 1883, and the Texas sun had baked the plains to the color of a lion's hide. His horse, a buckskin mare named Clementine with more sense than many men he knew, blew a tired breath as they crested the final rise. Below them, nestled in a gentle fold of the earth, was the Calloway Ranch. It was not a grand place in the way of the sprawling cattle empires farther west, but it was solid. The house was whitewashed and square, with a deep porch that promised shade. The fences were taut, their posts driven straight and true into the dark, rich soil. The barn was a handsome, silvered gray, its roofline sharp against the endless blue sky. It was a place that spoke of 30 years of showing up, of diligence and care. It spoke of Earl Calloway. Jesse's heart, which had been a low, steady drum against his ribs for 100 miles, began to beat a little faster. He had nothing, less than nothing by some reckonings. 25 years old, a worn saddle that had been old when he bought it, a good horse, and the clothes on his back. He had a reputation as a hard worker, a man who was quiet but honest, who could break a horse or mend a fence with equal patient skill. But in the ledger of the world, those things were written in invisible ink. A man's worth was measured in acreage and longhorns, and his own column was starkly empty. Still, he had this. A knot of nerve pulled tight in his stomach. He had this one thing he was willing to ask for, and he would not be turned away without asking. He urged Clementine forward, down the gentle slope, the clean lines of the Calloway property resolving into specific details. A patch of late-blooming bluebonnets beside the lane, the glint of a glass jar on a windowsill, the low, contented sound of cattle grazing in the near pasture. He dismounted at the hitching post, his boots making a soft thud in the thick dust of the yard. He took a moment, stroking Clementine's neck, letting her nuzzle his shoulder. The worn harness leather felt familiar and grounding in his hands. He was not a man given to flights of fancy. He saw the world as it was, hard, often unforgiving, but with moments of stark, simple beauty. Mae Calloway was one of those moments. He had seen her in town, at the general store in Crestfall, her hands sorting through bolts of calico. He had seen her at the church social, her smile quiet but genuine as she served lemonade from a large porcelain pitcher. He had watched the way she moved, with a settled grace, the way she spoke to her father, with a mixture of respect and easy affection, the way a woman looks when she is rooted in a place, when she belongs to it and it belongs to her. He had never spoken more than a dozen words to her. "Good morning, Miss Calloway." "A fine day." "That it is, Mr. Holt." But in a world of few words, each one carried weight. And the weight of his feelings for her had become too heavy to carry alone on the open range. It had driven him here. He took off his hat, turning the sweat-stained brim in his hands, and walked toward the porch. Earl Calloway was already there. He had been there all along, sitting in a rocker in the deep shade, watching the dust of Jesse's approach. He was a man carved from the same hard earth as his ranch, his face a roadmap of sun and wind and worry. His hair was iron gray, but his shoulders were still broad under his chambray shirt. His eyes, pale and sharp, missed nothing. He did not get up. He simply stopped rocking. "Holt," he said. It was not a question. "Mr. Calloway." Jesse stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his hat in his hands, feeling suddenly young and foolishly exposed. The silence stretched, measured by the buzz of a fly and the distant lowing of a calf. Earl Calloway was not a cruel man, but he was a precise one. He looked at Jesse, at the dust and the earnest set of his jaw, and Jesse knew he was being weighed and measured. Inside the house, in the cool dimness of the hallway that ran behind the front parlor, Mae Calloway stood perfectly still. She had been mending a shirt of her father's, the needle still pinched between her thumb and forefinger. She had heard the hoofbeats, a slow, deliberate rhythm that was not the familiar gait of any of their own horses. She had moved to the window, her heart giving a little lurch she refused to name when she saw the lone rider on the buckskin mare. Jesse Holt. She knew him by sight, by the quiet way he held himself, by the reputation that preceded him like a shadow, a man who worked hard and spoke little. A good man. The town of Crestfall was full of young men who were loud about their prospects, who swaggered and boasted. Jesse Holt did neither. He simply was. And she had noticed. Oh, she had noticed. Now she stood by the screen door, hidden from view, listening. Her breath was a shallow thing in her chest. She knew her father. She knew this silence. He was a man who had watched countless young hopefuls confuse wanting something with deserving it. He believed in sweat and time and showing up. He did not believe in easy things. She pressed her fingers to her lips, the thimble cold against her skin. "I've come to ask your permission, sir," Jesse began, his voice a little rough from the road. He cleared his throat. "To court your daughter, Mae." There it was. The words hung in the still, hot air between the porch and the yard. Plain, direct, terrifying. Mae closed her eyes. She heard the words, and she heard the silence that followed. It was a silence so deep she could feel the weight of her father's thoughts. He would not be unkind, but he would be thorough. Earl Calloway finally made a small movement, leaning forward just enough for the rocker to creak. He looked past Jesse, out toward the horizon, as if consulting the land itself. He had seen boys like this before. Full of fire and hope, with pockets as empty as a dry creek bed. Most of them burned out or drifted away when the first real hardship hit. He had built this life for Mae, this solid, dependable world, to protect her from precisely that kind of uncertainty. His own wife, Ruth, had married him when he had nothing but a mule and a promise. He had spent 30 years making good on it. He knew the cost. "You're a good hand, Holt," Earl said, his voice flat. "Folks say you're honest." "I try to be, sir." "What have you got?" It was the question Jesse had been dreading, the one that laid him bare. "A good horse," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "A willingness to work." He did not say, "and a heart so full of your daughter it leaves no room for anything else." That was not a thing a man said. That was a thing a man was supposed to prove. Earl nodded slowly, as if Jesse had confirmed a fact he already knew. He looked from Jesse's worn boots to his sun-creased eyes. He saw the truth there. The boy was broke, but he wasn't weak. There was a difference, a vital one. "I'm not going to say no," Earl said, and Mae, in the hallway, felt a dizzying rush of hope, so sharp it almost buckled her knees. But her father was not finished. "But I'm not saying yes either." He leaned back, the rocker groaning in protest. "Old Man Deacon, 2 counties over. You know the place?" Jesse nodded. He knew it by reputation. A hard-luck sheep operation on poor land, clinging to solvency by a thread. "He's gotten old," Earl continued, his eyes fixed on Jesse's. "Too old to get through another winter alone. His wife passed last spring. He needs a man to see him and his flock through to March. Chop the wood, mend the fences, tend the lambing. Hard work. Unpaid." Mae's breath caught in her throat. 2 counties over. A whole winter. Unpaid. It was not a job. It was a sentence. It was a test designed to be failed, a burden meant to be refused. She understood her father's logic perfectly. If Holt was just another drifter with a passing fancy, he would balk. He would make an excuse, tip his hat, and ride away, and she would be saved the heartache. But if he was, something more. "No wages," Earl said, driving each word home like a fence post. "No promise of anything from me. No guarantee that a yes is waiting for you in the spring. Just a roof over your head and a share of whatever mutton and beans are on the table. It's a fool's bargain. He left the statement hanging in the air, an open invitation for Jesse to be sensible, to cut his losses and ride on. Jesse looked at the older man. He saw the test for what it was. It was fair. It was more than fair. It was a chance. Earl Calloway was not asking for money he did not have. He was asking for time, for sweat, for character. He was asking for proof. It was a language Jesse understood. Before Earl could add another condition, before he could finish the thought, Jesse spoke. "I'll take it," he said. One sentence. 2 words. From the dim hallway, Mae heard them. And in that moment, the long, cold winter ahead seemed not an obstacle, but a promise. It was the sound of a man who did not confuse wanting with deserving, but was willing to work to bridge the gap. She leaned her head against the cool wood of the doorframe and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Earl Calloway's expression did not change, but a subtle shift occurred in his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been respect. He had laid down an impossible hand, and the boy had not even blinked. "You leave in the morning," Earl said, his voice still level. "I'll leave now," Jesse replied. "Winter comes early in those hills." He put his hat back on his head, the gesture firm, decisive. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Mr. Calloway." He turned without another word and walked back to his horse. He did not look at the house. He did not need to. He knew she was in there, just as he knew the sun would rise in the east. It was a faith he couldn't explain and didn't need to. He swung up into the worn saddle, the leather creaking a familiar complaint. He gathered the reins, turned Clementine's head back toward the road he had just traveled, and rode away from the solid, perfect ranch and the woman who lived inside it. He rode toward a failing sheep farm, a long winter, and the only kind of payment he had to offer. The journey to the Deacon place was a reversal of his hopes. The land grew harder, the soil thinner and rockier. The lush green of the Calloway pastures gave way to scrub oak and prickly pear. The 2 counties felt like 200 miles, each one stripping away another layer of the easy optimism he had felt riding in the other direction. By the time he found the turnoff, marked by a leaning post and a strand of rusted wire, the sun was low and casting long, skeletal shadows. The place was worse than he'd imagined. The cabin was little more than a shack, chinked with mud that was crumbling in long fissures. The barn sagged in the middle, its roof a patchwork of rotted shingles and hope. The sheep, a scrawny, dirty flock, huddled against a fence that was more gaps than wire. An old man sat on the porch, a blanket over his knees despite the warmth of the evening, his face as weathered and collapsed as the land around him. This was Deacon. The old man watched him approach with rheumy, suspicious eyes. "Calloway sent you?" he rasped. "Yes, sir. He said you was a fool." "He might be right," Jesse admitted, swinging down from his horse. The work was before him, immense and dispiriting. He could feel the cold of the coming winter in the very bones of the place. But he had given his word. The first month was a blur of ceaseless labor. He rebuilt the fence line first, his hands raw from stretching the cold wire, his muscles screaming from digging post holes in the rocky ground. He patched the barn roof, using scavenged lumber and tar he bought in the nearest town with the last of his silver dollars. He chopped wood until his back was a solid wall of pain, stacking a small mountain of cordwood against the cabin that would see them through the deepest freezes. He did not talk much to Old Man Deacon. The old man did not talk much back. There was only the work. In the evenings, by the weak light of a kerosene lamp, the exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing him down into his chair. But there was another ache, a deeper one. The silence of the place was absolute, broken only by the wind or the bleating of a sheep. It was in this crushing loneliness that he thought of Mae. He thought of her in the well-kept house, the scent of baking bread and clean laundry. He thought of her quiet smile, and the thought was both a comfort and a torment. After a month of this, a traveling post-rider stopped, a rare visitor on his way to a remote settlement farther in the hills. On impulse, Jesse bought a sheet of paper and an envelope. That night, after Deacon had gone to his cot, Jesse sat at the rough-hewn table and tried to write a letter. What could he say? He couldn't write of love. He had no right. He couldn't write of the hardship. That would be complaining. He dipped the pen in the watery ink and began to write about the things he knew. "Miss Calloway," he wrote, "the fences here are in a poor state, but the posts are good cedar and will hold. I have seen a hawk nesting in the tall rocks to the north. It is a fine, proud bird. The wind has a bite to it already. I trust you and your father are well." He signed it, Jesse Holt. It felt foolish, inadequate. He almost threw it in the fire. But he folded it, sealed it, and gave it to the post rider on his return journey, along with a coin for delivery. He expected nothing. It was an act of pure, unadorned hope, a message cast into the wilderness. 3 weeks later, the post rider returned. He tossed a small packet onto the porch. "For you," he said, and wrote on. Jesse's name was on the front, in a neat, clean hand. His heart hammered against his ribs. He took it inside, his hands fumbling, feeling clumsy and large. He opened it carefully. "Mr. Holt," it began. "We are well, thank you. Father says a good fence is the beginning of a good ranch. We have had some rain, which the pastures needed. The hawk you mention, does it cry in the morning? We have one here that does. I am glad to hear you are making things right at the Deacon place. Be safe in the coming cold." It was signed Mae Calloway. He read the letter 10 times. He traced the shape of her name with his finger. She had answered. She had not only answered, she had asked a question. "Does it cry in the morning?" It was a conversation. A thread spun across 2 counties, thin and fragile, but real. That night, the work felt lighter. The wind felt less sharp. He wrote back immediately. "Yes, it cries. Loudly. The sheep do not care for it. The barn roof is now sound against the rain you sent our way. Deacon has a cough, but his spirits are improved by the stacked firewood." And so it began. His 4 letters, born of loneliness and duty, were answered by her 6. He wrote of the first snow, how it blanketed the broken land and made it beautiful. She wrote of the town's Christmas preparations, of the scent of pine and cinnamon in their house. He wrote of the difficult birth of the first lamb, a midnight struggle in the freezing barn that ended in a new, bleating life. She wrote that she had told her father about the lamb, and he had nodded and said, "Good. That's good." Her letters were his only warmth. He kept them in his saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth. In the darkest, coldest nights of January, when the wind howled like a starving wolf and the cabin groaned under the weight of the snow, he would take them out and read them by the glow of the fire. Her neat script was a map of a world he wanted to return to. Her simple words about the weather, about a neighbor's new baby, about a book she was reading, were anchors holding him to sanity. He grew thinner. The work was relentless, and the food was plain and scarce. The cold settled deep in his bones, but something inside him was growing stronger. Each fence post he set, each lamb he saved, each cord of wood he chopped was a word in a long, silent argument. It was his case. He was not just enduring the winter. He was answering the question Earl Calloway had asked him. "What have you got?" He had this stubborn refusal to quit, this ability to make something from nothing. This patient, grinding, day-by-day act of showing up. March came not with a roar, but with a whisper, a slow dripping from the eaves, the smell of wet earth instead of frozen dust. The sun had a new warmth to it. The sheep, their flock now larger by 20 lambs, shed their thick winter coats. Old Man Deacon was still coughing, but he was alive. He walked the new fence line with Jesse, his hand on the taut wire. "You did good work, son," the old man said, his first real compliment in 6 months. Calloway was right. "You're a fool." The best kind. The day Jesse left, Deacon pressed a small, heavy purse into his hand. "Your share of the wool," he said. "It ain't wages. It's a partnership." Jesse tried to refuse, but the old man's grip was surprisingly strong. "Take it," Deacon insisted. "A man needs something in his pocket to feel like a man." So he rode out of the Deacon place, not as broke as he had arrived, but the money felt incidental. It was not what he had earned. What he had earned was lighter than coin and heavier than gold. It was the knowledge, deep in his gut, that he had been tested and not been found wanting. The ride back was different. The land that had seemed harsh and forbidding on the way in now looked merely challenging, a place a man could put his mark on. He saw it with new eyes. He saw where a house could sit, where a pasture could be cleared. The world felt full of possibility. He rode Clementine hard, but this time it was not with the grimness of duty, but with the pull of hope. He thought of Mae's last letter, which had arrived only a week before. It was shorter than the others. "The wildflowers will be out soon," she had written. "The roads are clear." It was an invitation, a summons. He crested the final rise, the same one he had crossed 6 months before. And there it was, the Calloway Ranch. Solid. Sure. Home. It was not yet noon, but he was not the only one watching the road. Mae had been up since dawn. She had done her chores in a haze of anticipation. She had kneaded bread, her knuckles pressing into the dough with a nervous energy. She had swept the porch twice. She had changed her dress from her work calico to her good blue gingham. Now, she stood by the window, the same window from which she had first seen him arrive, and watched the horizon. Her father had said nothing all morning, but she felt his awareness. He sat on the porch, oiling a piece of harness, his movements slow and deliberate. He knew. They both knew. Today was the day. Her faith had been a quiet, steady flame all winter. His letters, stark and practical, were a testament to his character. He wrote of work, of hawks, of snow. He never wrote of her. But she was there, in every line. She was the reason for the fences, the reason for the firewood. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. And then she saw it. A speck. A distant mote of dust on the road from the east. She did not cry out. She did not run. A stillness settled over her. She simply watched the speck grow, resolving itself into a horse and rider. A buckskin mare. A man sitting tall in the saddle. He was thinner. She could see that even from this distance. But he was not bent. He rode with a purpose she recognized. She smoothed her dress, took one last deep breath, and walked out of the house, letting the screen door bang shut behind her. She did not go to the porch to stand beside her father. She walked down the steps and into the yard, into the open, sunlit space where he would have to ride. She would meet him there. She had been waiting all winter. She would not wait a moment longer. Jesse saw her as he rode down the slope, a flash of blue against the green of the yard. His heart, which had been pounding a steady rhythm of home, 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 gave a great, soaring leap. She was there. She was waiting. He drew Clementine to a halt a dozen feet away, the dust settling around them. He looked at her, and it was like seeing the sun after a long, dark night. She was more beautiful than he remembered, more real than the ghost he had carried in his mind all winter. He swung down from the saddle, his movements stiff from the long ride. He took off his hat. He stood before her, a man returned from a far country, with nothing to show for it but the proof of his own endurance. But he did not get to her first. Earl Calloway had risen from his chair. He walked to the edge of the porch, the piece of oiled leather still in his hand. He looked at Jessie, his eyes taking in the worn clothes, the leaner frame, the new, unshakable confidence in his stance. He looked at the horse, slick and well cared for despite the journey. He looked at his daughter, standing in the yard with her heart in her eyes. Jessie met his gaze, ready for the final judgment. Earl was quiet for a long moment. The silence was different this time. It was not a test. It was a reflection. "I came to this land with nothing," Earl said, his voice quiet, meant only for Jessie. A stubborn wife, a strong back, and a belief that tomorrow could be better if I worked hard enough today. "I built this ranch myself on nothing but Ruth's faith and 30 years of showing up." He paused, his gaze shifting from Jessie to Mae, and then back again. He saw the thread that connected them, the one spun from 6 months of letters and a winter of hard labor. It was stronger than steel. He stepped aside, clearing the path from the porch steps to the yard. He looked Jessie Holt square in the eye. "She needs your heart," Earl Calloway said, his voice rough with an emotion he would never name. "Not your money." And with that he turned and went into the house, leaving the two of them alone in the vast Texas sunshine. The world shrank to the space between them. The ranch, the sky, the future. It was all there in the dozen feet of dusty ground. Mae took a step forward. "You came back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I said I would," Jessie answered. He took a step, then another, closing the distance. He stopped in front of her, his hat in his hands, his heart in his throat. He could smell the faint scent of soap and sunlight that clung to her. He saw the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Mae," he said, and her name was a prayer. "Jessie," she breathed. He had rehearsed a speech on the long ride back, a plain-spoken declaration of his intentions. It involved his earnings from the wool, his plans to buy a small plot of land, his promise to build her a life. It all evaporated in the simple, overwhelming reality of her presence. "I would like to stay, Mae," he said, the words feeling clumsy and small. "As your husband." A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face, the one he had dreamed of all winter. "It took you long enough," she said, and she reached out and took his hand. The wedding was in June, a simple affair in the front yard under the shade of a tall pecan tree. Mae wore a dress of white lawn that she had sewn herself, and Jessie wore a new suit that felt stiff and unfamiliar. The whole town of Crestfall seemed to be there, their faces a sea of approval. Earl Calloway gave his daughter away with a grip of Jessie's hand that was both a blessing and a warning. They said their vows, plain and simple, meaning every word. 5 years later, they stood on the porch of their own home. It was built on 100 acres of what had once been the far pasture of the Calloway Ranch, a wedding gift from Earl. The house was small but solid, the fences were straight and true, and a field of healthy cotton stretched out before them. A boy of 4 with his father's steady eyes and his mother's quiet smile chased a chicken across the yard, his laughter bright in the evening air. A baby girl slept in a cradle just inside the open door. Jessie came up behind Mae, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against his chest, her hand covering his. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set, painting the clouds in hues of orange and rose. It was a ritual they shared most evenings. "He was chasing that same chicken yesterday," Mae observed quietly. "It's a stubborn bird," Jessie said, a smile in his voice. "He'll get it. He's got a good heart for the work." Mae turned in his arms to face him. The lines of work and sun were deeper on his face now, but his eyes were the same. Steady, honest, full of a love that didn't need big words. "Remember that first letter you wrote me?" she asked. "I remember all of them," he said. "The one about the hawk? You were so careful," she mused, tracing the line of his jaw, writing about fences and birds. I knew, though. Knew what? That you were really writing about wanting to come home. He didn't answer right away, just tightened his hold on her. He looked out at the land he had built, the family he had made. The long winter at the Deacon place felt like a lifetime ago, a story told about another man. But it was the foundation of everything. It was the showing up. The thing about a plain-spoken life is that the truth of it rings clear. There are no grand gestures, only 1,000 small, steady ones. A mended fence, a hot meal, a hand held in the twilight. A shared silence that says everything. It was a life built not on what a man had in his pockets, but on what he was willing to build with his own 2 hands, and the faith of a good woman who was watching the road, waiting for him to arrive. He kissed his wife's forehead, the quietest promise of them all. A promise to keep showing up, tomorrow and the day after, for all the days to come.